Tonight, the travel chaos as millions of Americans prepare to hit the skies and roads this July 4th weekend. More than 3,000 flights already canceled this week, and that number expected to grow. Delta already issuing travel waivers as some of their pilots join the picket line. A record number of Americans choosing to drive this year, but in several states, gas is still over $5 a gallon, what travelers need to know. Also, the Supreme Court in the spotlight. The justices issuing major rulings on the environment, immigration on this last day of this explosive term. President Biden once again slamming the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, and today calling on Congress to end the filibuster and codify abortion rights. Plus the historic change on the bench. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson sworn in, becoming the first black woman on the nation's highest court. Caught in Costa Rica, the new image tonight of the woman suspected of killing an elite cyclist in Texas after she was arrested in Central America. What we know about her months on the run. Plus the urgent manhunt in New York City after a 20-year-old mother was shot in the head at point-blank range while she pushed her 3-month-old child in a stroller. So was she targeted? Neighborhood rocked, a home security cam capturing a home explosion in California. A woman inside at the time making it out alive. And rescue at sea, the moment a 4-month-old was pulled from the Mediterranean Sea as crews raced to save dozens of migrants after their boat overturned. Top story starts right now. And good evening. As we come on the air, millions of Americans have already started traveling for July 4th weekend. But this year is expected to cost more in money, time, and patience. The familiar scene this summer tonight, airports packed. You see them right there with long lines and crowds, boards lit up with delays and cancellations. As we reported last night, Delta Airlines already warning of disruptions, even offering flight changes with no fees or price increases, and only making matters worse. And this is new for that airline. Off-duty Delta pilots picketing outside several airports today, saying they are overworked and fed up. The flight mess adding to a record number of Americans who are choosing to drive to their destinations this year, but they will also face record prices when they go to fill up. Tonight, we're going to have tips on how to prepare if you are traveling, including the rights you have if your flight is delayed or canceled. All that in just a few minutes, but we begin with NBC's Tom Costello in Washington.
Walking information picket lines at 7 airports nationwide today, off-duty Delta pilots in contract talks who say they're working excessive overtime as the airline tries to fly its schedule without enough pilots.
Those are fatiguing schedules, working as hard as we can.
Delta, United, and American have struggled since Memorial Day. More than 3,000 total cancellations just since Sunday morning.
We don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of time. So when you do that, there goes your vacation.
In an email to customers, Delta CEO today said this level of disruption and uncertainty is unacceptable. Meanwhile, the FAA identifying volatile weather again today, leading to more delays and cancellations.
Today, airlines are carrying the highest numbers of passengers since early 2020.
But the vast majority of Americans, 42 million, are driving this weekend, a new record, and paying record July 4th pump prices, $4.86 a gallon, though down 16 cents in 2 weeks. President Biden says the embargo on Russian oil means Americans will continue paying a premium at the pump.
As long as it takes, so Russia cannot, in fact, defeat Ukraine.
Higher oil prices also lead to higher jet fuel and airline ticket prices, cutting into vacation budgets on the road and in the air.
All right, Tom joins us now from Washington. So, Tom, going back to those picket lines, has Delta said anything about how they plan to deal with the pilots' demands as the airlines face major setbacks due to worker shortages?
Well, listen, as you know, whenever big unions have labor disputes, it's not unusual for them to take to picket lines, right? These Delta pilots are not striking. These are informational picket lines. They're demanding better pay. They want to be more competitive with the other airlines because United Airlines just raised their pilot pay. So did American. Regionals are raising pay by up to 300%. So the Delta pilots want more money. Delta says it's negotiating. It's committed to offering best-in-class compensation.
So, Tom, one of the reasons why we're leading with this story is because in a lot of ways, we have never seen this in the history of air travel in this country. You cover air travel for us. What is your gut telling you about this weekend and the summer ahead?
Listen, we are not going to see things suddenly turn around and get better, right? Because we know that most of the airlines are admitting they don't have the pilots to fill the summer schedules that they already put out there a few months ago and the people bought tickets on. And that's why they're now cutting back on their schedules, and that's why they're hiring pilots and training pilots. This is not a quick fix. As you and I discussed last night, this could go on for months or even years. I think the rest of the summer may start to improve a little bit because of all the schedule cuts. Hopefully will bring the schedule in alignment with their staffing levels, and then hopefully over the fall they're going to have time to right the ship, if you will, to right-size the schedule. And let's hope that it's ready in time for Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yeah, we hope so. Tom Costello leading us off tonight. Tom, we thank you for that. We know you still have a lot of questions or may already be dealing with cancellations tonight, so let's get you some help. I want to bring in Nick Ewan from The Points Guy, the experts on the best way to travel smart. So, Nick, what should people know about their rights as a passenger when it comes to those canceled or delayed flights?
Well, unfortunately, here in the U.S., we don't have the same level of consumer protection that you see in the European Union, for example, and some other countries. So there's not a ton that you can do. But if the cancellation or delay is within the airline's control, like a mechanical delay or something else dealing with staffing or system outages, that should allow you to get some form of compensation and food vouchers, potentially a hotel room overnight. But if it's weather related or something outside of their control, like an air traffic control delay, you may be on the hook for any additional expenses.
And Nick, what's the best strategy to get rebooked? Because so many people are dealing with this right now.
The best thing is to be your own advocate. If you're traveling with a group, have one person stand in line at the airport, have another person get on the phone line, have another person try text messaging or sending direct messages via social media. Try to pull out all of the stops that you have to find availability and grab those seats, and try to be as proactive as possible with getting to the airport early, checking to see where your plane is coming from. Oftentimes, airline apps will allow you to see where the inbound aircraft is actually coming from, so you can sometimes know ahead of time before your flight is even delayed.
Yeah, always great to click that "Where's my plane" link. Okay, Nick Ewan from The Points Guy. Love having you on. Okay, now to the other major story tonight, the U.S. Supreme Court wrapping up a term that reshaped the court itself and the country in dramatic fashion. The term ending today with split decisions for the Biden administration on immigration and the environment. Justice correspondent Pete Williams has more.
In one of the most important environmental rulings in decades, the court said the EPA does not have broad authority to limit greenhouse gas emissions by shifting energy production away from coal-burning plants and toward cleaner sources like wind and solar. By a 6-3 vote, the court said such a major action would require explicit permission from Congress. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said it is not plausible that Congress gave EPA the authority to adopt on its own such a regulatory scheme.
It has really cut off the agency's ability to do the farthest reaching, most impactful thing, to cut carbon emissions from the power sector. That's the sector of the economy that produces about a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions.
For the dissenters, Justice Elena Kagan said the decision means the court appoints itself the decision maker on climate policy. I cannot think of many things more frightening. The court's ruling also could have broader implications because it said only Congress, not federal agencies, can set the rules on what it called major questions. Some legal experts say that's a recipe for inaction.
Congress doesn't have the time or the expertise to be able to address all of the major social and economic problems on its agenda. And in addition, it's often incapable of reaching grand bargains.
In a separate case, the Biden administration can go ahead with its efforts to end the Trump program that forces migrants seeking asylum to wait in Mexico. The vote 5-4, with Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh joining the court's 3 liberals. Today also marked the end of Justice Stephen Breyer's 28 years on the court. His last official act was to join Roberts in administering the required 2 oaths of office to Ketanji Brown Jackson, who becomes the court's first black woman.
So help me God.
Now, on behalf of all of the members of the court, I am pleased to welcome Justice Jackson to the court and to our common calling.
And Pete, with that news, it has been an incredible few weeks from the Supreme Court, to say the least. Pete Williams joins us now from outside the Supreme Court. The court did say it will hear a case that could affect the coming presidential election.
Yes, it agreed to decide whether state legislatures, not state courts, get to set the rules, have the last word on how elections for federal candidates are conducted. Republicans say that's how it's supposed to work, but opponents say that would leave state courts unable to defend voters if their rights were threatened, Tom.
All right, Pete, so we had some decisions today, and I wanted to kind of ask you again to kind of take a big picture view of this. What are your takeaways from the past term, and where do you think things are headed?
My takeaway is that the conservative majority on the court now, the supermajority, is large and in charge. They now have the votes. They're moving along quickly. And I think we're going to see the same sort of conservative pattern in the term to come, Tom.
Pete Williams for us tonight. Pete, we thank you for that. And tonight, President Biden on an overseas trip slamming the Supreme Court for its decision overturning Roe v. Wade, calling it outrageous and urging a controversial change to Senate rules in response. Kelly O'Donnell has that story.
From a world stage moment in Spain, President Biden accused the highest court of upending American freedoms.
The one thing that has been destabilizing is the outrageous behavior of the Supreme Court of the United States in overruling not only Roe v. Wade, but essentially challenging the right to privacy.
Consequences he sees as so dire, the president urged Congress to restore abortion rights with new law. But in a 50-50 Senate, Democrats don't have enough votes, making a surprise announcement today.
And if the filibuster gets in the way,
the president said he would back a limited change to Senate rules to allow a simple majority vote to make abortion legal again nationally.
Require an exception to the filibuster for this action to deal with the Supreme Court decision.
That's a flip, breaking his decades-long filibuster support.
Ending the filibuster is a very dangerous thing to do.
But tonight, top Democrats say they cannot make the change because a few Democrats won't agree. While top Republican Mitch McConnell said the president's attacks on the court are unmerited and dangerous. Today, I asked about the political pressure he faces.
Are you the best messenger to carry this forward when Democrats, many of them, many progressives, want you to do more?
Yeah, I am. I'm the President of the United States of America. That makes me the best messenger.
Back at the White House tomorrow, the president will meet with several Democratic governors to talk about things they can do on abortion rights at the state level. And advisors say the president will have announcements to make about how he can use his power on this issue until Congress acts. Tom?
Okay, Kelly, we thank you for that. And sticking with the Supreme Court, we want to take a more in-depth look now at one of those rulings today, the one dealing with immigration, allowing President Biden to end the Remain in Mexico policy at the border. It has migrant advocates celebrating, but critics say it will send a record number of border crossings even higher. Gabe Gutierrez has the late details.
Tonight, another tragedy at the southern border. 4 migrants killed in Texas as authorities chased alleged human smugglers. It comes just days after 53 migrants died in San Antonio. As the immigration debate ramps up, now the Supreme Court has ruled the Biden administration can end the Trump-era Remain in Mexico policy.
I was very happy to hear it.
We first met immigrant advocate Felicia Rangel Sampanaro a year ago at a migrant tent camp in Reynosa, Mexico.
There's an overwhelming sense of desperation here.
Since then, she says that side of the border has grown increasingly dangerous.
The asylum seekers get murdered all the time in Mexico. There are kidnappings every day.
Remain in Mexico required asylum seekers to wait south of the border while their U.S. asylum cases were processed. Its supporters argue that today's Supreme Court decision will encourage even more migrants to come to the U.S.
This is devastating for the state of Texas and the United States of America. We're going to see more people here illegally than live in the 2 largest cities in America, New York and Los Angeles, combined.
There were more than 239,000 illegal border crossings in May, the highest monthly total ever recorded.
If you don't have any repercussions and they feel that all they're going to do is see a speed bump at the border, of course they're going to continue coming.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez joins us now in studio. So, Gabe, we've talked so much about Title 42, which is another policy affecting migrants. Explain to our viewers the difference with the other policy you were talking about earlier in your report, and what does the Biden administration plan to do with Title 42?
Well, you're right, Tom. Title 42 is different than what the Supreme Court
ruled on today, which is Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, the Remain in Mexico policy. Title 42 is another Trump-era policy. It was enacted during the pandemic to keep migrants out of this country. Several weeks ago, you may remember that a federal judge in Louisiana prevented the Biden administration from lifting Title 42, and that means that the Department of Justice is now appealing that ruling. But bottom line, Tom, migrants in the U.S., we know, are still being let out into this country despite Title 42 being in place. What is clear at this point is that Republicans will seize on the immigration issue over the coming months ahead of the midterm elections.
All right, Gabe, we appreciate that. And caught in the middle of the politics are the people. We're learning more about the victims found in that trailer truck in Texas. 4 arrests have been made in connection to the tragedy, which comes as little relief to the families of the victims, many thousands of miles away. And a reminder, we are talking about at least 53 people who died in that truck. NBC's Guad Venegas has their stories.
Tonight, new details from the tractor-trailer tragedy in San Antonio, Texas. 4 people have been arrested in connection to the case, 2 of them charged with crimes resulting in the deaths of at least 53 people. The suspected driver, Homero Zamorano, appearing in federal court today, facing human smuggling charges resulting with the death of the victims. Today, a mourning community in the U.S. and abroad, angry and heartbroken.
Gente, no se crean, por favor, para seguir el sueño americano. No existe el sueño. Es una fantasía que tenemos.
Among the dead, children, teenagers, parents, and dozens of people searching for a new life in the United States. We are learning more about the lives lost, with investigators identifying 53 victims, 27 from Mexico, 4 from Honduras, and 8 from Guatemala. Among them, 2 13-year-old cousins, Wilmer Tulul and Pascual Melvin Huachiac. The boys had traveled from the mountainous town of Sucubal, keeping each other company, traveling almost 1,500 miles from home before dying together in Texas.
Ellos querían un futuro mejor, porque acá en Guatemala no se gana nada.
Today, the families are inconsolable, the heartbreak extending to Honduras. Brothers 23-year-old Alejandro Andino and 18-year-old Fernando Redondo Caballero left excited to start a new life.
Estaban ansiosos por hacer el viaje. Todos los días me preguntaban, mami, ¿cuándo nos vamos a ir?
Alejandro's wife, Margie Tamara Paz Grajear, was with him. She was just 20 years old and also died in the trailer.
Me causó mucha gracia a la vez que me dijo, mami, cuando estemos allá sí te vamos a hacer tu casita. Y yo les dije, yo ya no ocupo la casita porque ustedes ya no van a estar acá. Mis 2 hijos marchan.
In Mexico, families now dealing with the painful task of waiting for the bodies of their loved ones.
Como es ahora, me dieron una noticia de que encontraron el acta de mi hijo en uno de los muertitos, en la bolsa de uno de los muertitos. Entonces, pues ya no sé, bueno, pues ya me dijeron que me vaya yo previniendo para recibir el cuerpo.
The mother of Marcos Antonio Velasco, remembering her son's last words.
Y me dijo que le echara yo su bendición y pues hasta ahí de ahí ya no supe nada.
While others are still looking for answers, like the family of 19-year-old Yair Valencia and his brother 16-year-old Giovanni Valencia from Veracruz, still missing days after the trailer was found.
No sabemos nada. Nadie nos dice nada. No sabemos cómo están. Nosotros día y noche no dormimos.
All right, Guad Venegas joins us now live from the scene of that tragedy. Guad, it is so hard to hear from those families tonight. I know you're getting new information tonight that even more victims are now being identified.
Tom, just minutes ago, a representative from the government of Honduras came to this memorial where people have been bringing flowers, flags, and other items. The representative of the government told us that they've now identified 5 citizens of Honduras. He said they found the ID of a woman in the trailer, and this would be the 5th person from that country. In fact, he told us he had just made the difficult phone call to the family, telling them that the ID of this woman was found inside the trailer, and most likely she is among the dead. Now, all of the people whose IDs were found still have to go through some type of test in order to confirm that it is them. But most of these people, of course, if they find the IDs, they are telling the families that it is most likely that their family members were in that semi-trailer and the semi-truck trailer. Meanwhile, this memorial continues to grow. It is about 100 degrees here, and people are still bringing flowers, flags, and spending time here to mourn the victims, Tom.
Hey, Gua, just because you mentioned the temperature there, and I know that temperature was similar to when the truck was parked there, can you imagine how hot it was inside that tractor trailer now that you've been in the sun there for several hours?
Tom, I can give you the perfect example. When we do our reporting here, we have to record voice. In order to do this, we have to go inside the car, turn off the car, turn off the AC. This is a process that takes about 5 minutes. Within those 5 minutes, I was dripping in sweat. I don't think a person can stay in a vehicle. This is just a normal car for more than 10 minutes under these temperatures. So you can imagine what it would be like being in one of these trailers, all metal, under these temperatures for longer than a few minutes. That's what these people had to go through before they died, Tom.
Yeah, a tractor trailer filled with humans, probably no breathing space. Okay, Guad, thank you for putting that into perspective as we continue to cover this immigration tragedy. All right, we want to move on now to a shocking discovery in a courthouse basement. The family of Emmett Till, who was murdered 70 years ago, is looking for justice. They found an unserved warrant for one of the people allegedly involved in his kidnapping, and it turns out she's still alive. NBC's Ron Allen has more.
Some 67 years after the gruesome kidnapping, torture, and murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till, a document just found in the basement of a Mississippi courthouse, reigniting his family's decades-long quest for justice.
We dropped to our knees, we prayed, we shouted, we embraced each other.
Till's cousin, Deborah Watts, says the family found an unserved warrant for the arrest of Carolyn Bryant Dunham for kidnapping, the woman who Till supposedly made a rude gesture toward in a store in 1955. Her husband, Roy Bryant, and his half-brother then abducted and murdered Till, his mutilated body in an open casket, one of the most iconic images of the civil rights era. Till's killers, both now dead, were acquitted by an all-white jury, but later confessed in interviews. But Dunham, now in her 80s, was never arrested or charged.
Do you really think this is a turning point?
I do. I have to hold out hope. And there is a note on the reverse side of the warrant that indicates that she was not found in the county. But no one ever really searched for her.
No comment today from state and federal investigators who, through the decades, have reopened and closed the case as recently as last year. Some legal experts say prosecutors would likely have to obtain a new warrant if they choose to pursue the case. And no comment today from Dunham herself. We were unable to reach Dunham.
I believe that Mississippi has blood on their hands, and they have an opportunity now to clean that up and to make sure that justice prevails.
A family's fight endures in the brutal killing of a young boy that changed an entire nation. Ron Allen, NBC News.
Okay, we thank Ron for that. Still ahead tonight, the urgent manhunt in New York City. The mother shot in the head while she pushed her infant in a stroller. The new details her family just revealed. Plus, the home explosion. Take a look. Caught on camera. What we're learning tonight about the woman who was inside at the time. And another twist in the legal saga for a once prominent attorney, Alex Murdaugh. Was he part of a drug smuggling scheme? Stay with us. We're back now with that chilling headline out of New York. A young mother pushing a stroller, holding her 3-month-old child, executed on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Authorities saying they strongly believe the gunman targeted that victim. A manhunt is now underway for the shooter. Emily Aketa has the latest.
Tonight, a young mother is dead after police say a gunman shot her at close range as she pushed her infant in a stroller. 20-year-old Asia Johnson's family say she's the victim of domestic violence. Police confirm they are looking to interview the child's father, but have not named anyone as a suspect. Wednesday's attack considered targeted and brazen, stunning New York's Upper East Side just before 8:30 p.m.
I raised my daughter here. She doesn't live in New York City. I literally said to her, I'm glad you're not living in New York. Don't come back. It's not safe.
A park full of children within earshot.
I just heard a big boom sound.
Shootings in New York City have actually slowed since last year, but are still surging 80% compared to 2019, pre-pandemic. A spate of recent high-profile incidents, including the shooting of an 11-year-old in the Bronx and a subway rider near Lower Manhattan, are driving further fear.
What does that do to the psyche of New Yorkers here?
Well, it's horrifying. Every time you hear one of these stories, especially when they include the fact that the 3-month-old in a stroller was right there, it just makes your skin crawl.
The country's rise in violence met by a raging debate over how to curb it. Just days after the Supreme Court struck down New York's concealed carry restrictions, state lawmakers now looking to ramp up gun control in other ways, like tightening rules around gun storage and banning people from carrying firearms into businesses without a sign explicitly permitting them. 5 other states, also impacted by last week's SCOTUS ruling, may follow in New York's footsteps as the race to rein in crime intensifies.
All right, Emily Aketa joins us now from here in 30 Rock. So, Emily, if we can go back to that horrific murder that happened with that mother, so many across New York City woke up this morning to this story. And even though there's been a lot of crime in New York City, this one was particularly so bad. Do we know anything about the manhunt and or a suspect?
So right now, one of the things investigators are doing, Tom, is sifting through surveillance video that reportedly shows the gunman pacing back and forth in front of a residence before committing the unthinkable. Asia Johnson's mother alleges that she suffered abuse at the hands of her child's father, and that reportedly steered her to go to a domestic violence shelter at one point. I should underscore and emphasize, Tom, still at this point, police have not named a suspect. Back to you.
Okay, Emily Aketa first. For more on this manhunt and the growing concerns about crime in New York City, I want to bring in former New York City Police Commissioner Dermot Shea. Commissioner, thanks for joining Top Story again tonight.
Thanks.
So we've seen the evidence so far, what's been released publicly. You're obviously a former crime fighter. What is your take? Do you think all the evidence is pointing to one suspect, the father of that child who the family believes did this?
Well, it certainly looks that way from here. I can tell you that investigators, as they start this process out, will keep an open mind. But certainly all the evidence at this point that you hear at least being said points to an encounter where they knew each other, and domestic certainly seems like a reasonable case in this case.
To shoot someone in the head in public who was with a baby, what does that tell you about the person who did this?
Well, I think the callous nature of it outdoors with a baby in a stroller really speaks to the heinous nature of the crime. And that's why it shocks the conscience of really the entire public here. And your heart goes out to the family of this poor woman, for sure. And I can assure you that detectives will be working around the clock as we speak, trying to bring justice to that young mother.
You know, in New York City, it seems every morning we open up the newspaper and there's a new horrific crime. This may be isolated, but it just sort of falls into that category of what is going on with New York City. This new mayor was elected, right, sort of to sweep the streets and make New York City a safer environment. I don't know if he's done that yet. What is the problem with crime in New York City right now? How would you describe it?
Well, if you look, we're about to embark on the second half of 2022, and this has been 2 very difficult years in New York City here, particularly on the violence front. As you alluded to, they've been able to knock shootings down, but still too high. I think you have to not look too far, Tom, and that's what people have to remember here. The New York City Police Department knows exactly how to fight crime in New York City, and they need resources and tools. And I would just remind people.
So we'll be a little bit more deliberate.
Laws. They need help on some of the laws, particularly the recidivist population.
Right.
People that are carrying guns over and over. It's not about mass incarceration.
People getting arrested and then back on the street the next day.
It's not about filling the jails back up. And there is a definable middle ground that can easily attain what everyone wants here. Safe streets, not too many people in jail, giving people second chances. People need to remember that it's not one or the other here. All of this is attainable. We proved it in 2017, 18, 19, while we drove incarceration down to the lowest levels and drove crime down.
Do you think the same thing in Philadelphia? We've done a lot of reporting about how much the killings there are affecting that community. I mean, we describe it as a war zone right now in Philadelphia. More killings than New York City, and it's a much smaller city. New Orleans, also crime is out of control. Do you think this all has to do with the police and the laws, or is it something else?
Well, it's an extremely complicated issue. So that is, put that out there. And you talk to poverty and you talk to many, many issues. Law enforcement is one piece of that. And I think they're part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think that multiple people have to come together from different levels of government. How can we do better? Business is helping, providing money, providing opportunity. But there's no question, you mentioned Philadelphia. You can talk about Chicago. You could talk about the last 2 years that we've had here in New York City. And we are losing people. And we're losing a generation of kids that are not only falling prey to this in one way or another, but they're growing up in that environment. And can you imagine children growing up in that environment, seeing guns and hearing shots every night? So we can do better. I know there's a lot of people trying right now, but believe me, coming to the table, looking at people in the middle of the table and saying, what can we do to help that individual? And I think when we kind of approach it from that framework, we'll get to the solution faster. But there is no doubt in my mind that the significant change in the laws over the last number of years has had a real negative impact on the police's ability to fight crime here in New York City.
All right, former NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea, who's been on the front lines for so many years. Commissioner, we appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Okay, next to new charges for that once prominent South Carolina attorney, Alex Murdaugh. Police already investigating the mysterious death of his family and his former housekeeper. And now authorities are accusing him of running a drug trafficking ring with the same man he says he hired to kill him. Vaughn Hilliard has the latest twist in this strange saga.
Tonight, the charges are piling up for embattled South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh, now indicted again, this time on charges of criminal conspiracy and narcotics. It comes after a slew of alleged criminal behavior and mysterious deaths surrounding his family. His wife and son murdered, a hit and run, a fatal boating accident, a dead housekeeper whose family says they never got a settlement payout, and Murdaugh himself alleged to have been shot during a foiled hitman for hire plot.
Murdaugh's charges now run every possible crime in the spectrum. You have conspiracy, you have narcotics trafficking, you have money laundering. This is truly a fall from grace.
Now up to 16 indictments. Prosecutors say his crimes extended to an 8-year money laundering and painkiller ring with the friend and former client. That man, Curtis Eddie Smith, who he allegedly hired to help him commit suicide, indicted on even more charges, including 4 counts of money laundering and trafficking methamphetamine. We reached out to Smith's attorney, but did not hear back. The Attorney General's office alleges that Murdaugh wrote around 437 checks, totaling $2.4 million to Smith, that Smith cashed out over 8 years, in large part to distribute oxycodone, according to unsealed indictments. Murdaugh's attorney declining to comment to NBC News, but saying last October when Murdaugh was first arrested,
he is going to try to right every wrong, financial wrong. He's reconciled to the fact he's going to prison.
Previously, Smith denied being involved in shooting Murdaugh.
No blood on me, there's no blood on him. He didn't get shot in the head. No.
Murdaugh was a once prominent South Carolina attorney whose father, grandfather, and great-grandfather held the district's powerful prosecutor's position for 87 years. Now tangled in a web of legal battles and unsolved crimes, accused of stealing more than $2.6 million from several clients and millions more from a wrongful death settlement after his longtime housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, suffered a fall at his home in 2018.
The original police report called Gloria Satterfield's death natural, and no autopsy was performed.
Her family telling Craig Melvin on Dateline last fall.
What did Alex Murdaugh say to you after your mom died?
That he would, take care of us and stuff and kind of look out for us.
Her death is now being reinvestigated. Murdaugh's issues came to light when he found his wife Maggie and their son Paul shot dead in their home in June 2021. His life began to unravel.
Another member of a prominent South Carolina family tied to a murder mystery has been shot,
bringing an end to the Murdaugh family's legal dynasty, lasting a century. Vaughn Hilliard, NBC News.
All right, coming up, fighting the flames, the massive fire tearing through a scrapyard in Pennsylvania. The investigation now underway. All right, we are back now with Top Stories newsfeed, and we begin with the home explosion caught on camera in California. A doorbell security cam capturing the blast in Victorville. This is about 75 miles east of Los Angeles. A woman was inside at the time. She miraculously survived, but remains in critical condition tonight. The home was reduced to rubble, and other nearby houses were damaged. The cause is now under investigation. Okay, next to that massive fire at a scrapyard in Pennsylvania. New video shows flames ripping through piles of junk and debris, sending thick black clouds billowing into the sky. This happened at a yard right on the state's border with New Jersey near Trenton. So far, no injuries have been reported. No word yet on what started this fire. The so-called crypto queen is now one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. The FBI says Dr. Ruja Ignatova, the founder of OneCoin, defrauded investors of more than $4 billion over 3 years before suddenly disappearing. She's believed to be traveling overseas, possibly with a German passport. A $100,000 reward is being offered for information leading to an arrest. All right, now to that breaking news involving a fugitive wanted in connection to the murder of an elite cyclist in Texas. U.S. Marshals announcing they have captured the suspect, Caitlin Armstrong, ending a manhunt that lasted more than a month. NBC's Kathy Park has the details.
After 6 weeks on the run, tonight the search is over for murder suspect and fugitive Caitlin Armstrong. U.S. Marshals announcing Armstrong is now in custody. Costa Rican authorities seen in this video holding Armstrong as she awaits deportation to the United States.
And it was just a matter of time before they located her and apprehended her.
Armstrong is accused of fatally shooting professional cyclist Anna Mariah Wilson back in May. They were romantically linked with the same man before the crime. At the time of Wilson's death, friends remembered her as a rising star in the gravel cycling circuit.
Just super nice and super sweet. Like, I don't think anyone would have anything bad to say about her. She was just dominating cycling in a way nobody typically does. She won the biggest race of the year so far to date by almost a half hour.
Last month, Austin police questioned Armstrong about Wilson's murder, but did not arrest her. Days later, she fled the state after selling her car. The security camera footage shows Armstrong flying out of Austin's airport. Just 1 day after Austin police issued an arrest warrant, authorities say Armstrong made her way to Costa Rica via Newark's Liberty Airport using a fraudulent passport.
She was doing everything possible to really stay off the radar with law enforcement officials, believing that, going to a foreign country that she could escape apprehension.
U.S. Marshals elevated their investigation to major case status, a move that likely contributed to her capture in Costa Rica.
When Caitlin Armstrong got elevated to a major case within the U.S. Marshal Service, that brings a whole lot of resources to the table, state-of-the-art equipment, money, manpower. It was a full court press. I mean, it was all hands on deck.
After an all-hands-on-deck investigation that lasted 43 days, Armstrong could soon be back in Texas.
Usually in an extradition proceeding, if she waives extradition, they have 10 days to get her back here to the United States. I think that'll happen pretty quickly, and she'll be back in Texas very shortly, and she'll get her day in court.
Kathy Park, NBC News.
Okay, time now for Money Talks, what consumers and investors need to know from the business world and beyond. On Wall Street, another day of losses on all three indices. Today marks the first half of the year, and the S&P 500 is down more than 20%, seeing its worst first 6 months in more than 50 years. The Dow also falling more than 15%, with the NASDAQ closing out its worst quarter since 2008. CNBC correspondent Kate Rogers joins us now. Kate, we've all seen the bad headlines. Is there a sense that we're anywhere near the bottom of this bear market?
Well, Tom, you said it. It's certainly been a rough first half of the year. The Dow and the S&P had their worst 3 months since Q1 of 2020. Remember when those COVID lockdowns really rocked the market. And the tech-heavy NASDAQ composite, it's down more than 20% for the second quarter. That's its worst stretch since 2008, the financial crisis. So analysts are really mixed on where we go from here. Some telling CNBC we can fall even further, but others are optimistic for a bounce back in the second half of the year. A lot of it will depend on how the Federal Reserve continues to tackle inflation and how aggressive it remains with its rate hikes to come. There's a lot of concern that aggressive action and those persistent rate hikes at meetings to come could tip the economy into a recession if the Fed moves too fast and too soon.
Yeah, and there's a lot of super bulls who are convinced that inflation is not as bad as what it seems on paper, that in a couple months it could get better. We're going to have to wait and see. I know you cover labor and small businesses. We're hearing about layoffs for the first time since the pandemic began. How big is the fear factor there that the recession is imminent, and with that, layoffs?
Yeah, certainly. We are seeing layoffs in certain pockets of the economy. The service sector is really still looking to hire. Tech, though, has been a big area for people getting laid off and losing their jobs. You mentioned small business. On that front, optimism is really poor per economic surveys from the National Federation of Independent Business. That's a small business advocacy group. Those that expect better business conditions fell last month to a negative 54%. That's the lowest level ever in this survey's history after falling every month this year. So on Main Street, certainly a gloomy outlook. On on the recession front, we're hearing from big company CEOs like Howard Schultz of Starbucks and others talking about spending in American families. Schultz recently said, quote, "We are on a collision course with time in terms of how long the American consumer, the American family can continue to spend at the level that they are. So it's hard to be optimistic unless there is a plan to get inflation under control." So there is a ton of talk right now out there in the market and at big companies and small about inflation in the long run and what that means for the economy these days.
You know, I mean, we're talking about so many things that may happen in the future. Let's talk about the past for a second. If 1970 does provide any sort of roadmap for us, the S&P plunged in the first half of the year, but then it rebounded in the second half and ended in the green. What are experts saying? I know every year is very different and every market is different, but are we looking to the past to see if there's any kind of roadmap going forward?
Yeah, it certainly can kind of offer a glimmer of hope. So if you look at the S&P in isolation, it's in even worse shape than the Dow and the NASDAQ. As you mentioned, it had its worst half since 1970. And so much of that comes down to those concerns over inflation. We keep talking about it. The Fed's rate hikes and then the broader geopolitical factors that are in the mix here, like the ongoing war in Ukraine and continued lockdowns in China over COVID-19. So we have to see now what the second half brings. But longer term issues like inflation and rate hikes are not going away as recession talk is on the rise. The Fed is now working to kind of play catch up to control inflation. Some say that if the Fed softens its stance on those aggressive rate hikes, we could see a market rebound. Rebounds like this are possible, but we have to see what action the Fed takes and how the market reacts from there. So it's anyone's guess. But as you mentioned, if we do look back in history, there are some silver linings here for sure.
All right, CNBC's Kate Rogers from San Francisco for us. Kate, we thank you for that. As Wall Street struggles to stabilize, the housing market also undergoing a major shift. Data from Realtor.com shows that active home listings rose 19% in June, and that number is expected to accelerate. But overall inventory is still very much down, about half of pre-pandemic levels. CNBC real estate correspondent Diana Olick joins us now. So, Diana, more inventory is becoming available. Houses are coming online, but prices are still skyrocketing. What does the market look like right now for the average buyer in the U.S.?
Well, it's very expensive still, Tom, and especially because you're seeing mortgage rates, which are really double what they were at the beginning of the year. That's why you're seeing some buyers actually opt for adjustable rate mortgages a lot more than we've seen in the last couple of years because they do offer lower interest rates and they're kind of stretching to afford. The one difference I think you'll see as a buyer out there is you're not going to see quite so many bidding wars. There's going to be less competition out there. Buyers, again, are stretching. They're not as competitive, and there is a little bit more on the market. But again, it is still very pricey, Tom.
Yeah, Diana, you know, I always like to ask you when you're on, what are some of the markets that are seeing the biggest rise right now in inventory?
Well, it's actually some of the markets that were hottest during the pandemic. That is Austin, Texas. And you're seeing listings jump in Las Vegas. You're seeing listings jump in areas like Raleigh and even in Phoenix, which was very hot during the pandemic. Now you're seeing more listings come on. One area, though, super hot during the pandemic, still super hot, Miami, Florida in general. Listings there are still down from a year ago. But again, most of the country is seeing more supply come on the market.
Yeah, the real estate market in Miami is wild, to say the least. But I want to follow up there with those markets that we were talking about that were so hot. Now inventory is coming up. Do we think this is some kind of bubble, or we just think that prices will come back to reality?
No, I think the latter, definitely. It's not a bubble at all because you still have demographics in play. Look, you have the millennial generation that still wants to buy homes, and we are undersupplied by about 1 million homes because we undersupplied so much. After the Great Recession, we didn't build enough homes. So there's still a shortage of homes for sale. There's just more than there were a year ago now, or not as bad in much of the country. But I think what you will see is price gains will start to ease. That is, come off the 20% gains and come back to a more historic, maybe 3 to 4% annual gain. The big question is, will we see prices come down? It wouldn't be the worst thing because they're so high right now. So even if you did see prices compared to a year ago go negative, that only matters if you actually bought your house this year. Otherwise, you are still in the money because, again, the gains are just so strong.
All right, Diana Olick for us tonight. Diana, we always love having you on. Thank you. Coming up, the tragedy at sea. The video just coming in, a packed boat with migrants sinking off the coast of Italy. Officials lifting an infant from the water, but dozens of others still missing. We'll have the latest. All right, we are back now with Top Stories Global Watch, and we begin with another migrant tragedy, this time on the Mediterranean Sea. A dramatic new video shows officials lifting a 4-month-old baby out of the water after officials say an overcrowded boat sank off the coast of Italy and Malta. A pregnant woman was killed. Nearly 24 people are still missing. Okay, heavy rains triggering deadly mudslides in southern Austria. Aerial footage shows roads flooded with muddy water, trapping cars and cutting off access to some villages. Several people have been rescued so far. They became trapped in their homes. Officials say at least one person has already died and that authorities are unable to access some homes in remote areas. All right, and Ecuador's government has reached an agreement with the country's main indigenous group, ending 18 days of protests. The often violent protests over rising fuel prices swept across the country and left several people dead. The agreement will reduce gasoline and diesel prices by 15 cents a gallon. It also limits the expansion of oil exploration areas and prohibits mining activity in protected areas, national parks, and water sources. Thanks so much for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. What's that? We apparently have some breaking news. Let's go outside. It appears the Minions have taken over 30 Rock. They've lit up 30 Rock in celebration of Minions, The Rise of Gru, which, of course, hits theaters tomorrow. It is incredible from what I'm hearing. All right, guys, have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.